Hi everybody, and thanks for viewing this YouTube fly tying tutorial. The pattern that I'm going to be tying for today is a Sulphur Soft Hackle Emerger, a pattern that I'll undoubtedly call a guide fly, being that it's very easy to tie and extremely effective with trout. Now this is going to be representing the sulphur mayfly, a prime time hatch in the eastern United States, primarily because it's found on so many of our rivers and streams. This pattern is going to be called an emerger, because it's going to be representing that stage between the nymph and the adult dun of the mayfly life cycle. As the mayfly makes its emergence through the water, it's in its nymphal skin, but eventually it'll crack out of its skin and crawl out and emerge as an adult dun mayfly. This pattern is going to be representing that part whenever the mayfly dun cracks and begins to crawl out, but it's still attached to its nymphal skin. The way that we as fly tiers show that nymphal skin still attached is by adding it on as a trailing shuck. In this case, I'll have brown/amber antron or zealand fibers attached as a tail/trailing shuck. There's a couple different ways to tie this pattern, and it's going to be based on the way that you'd like to fish it. I have two ways that I'll primarily fish this. For starters, whenever I add on my tippet of 5X, I'll tie it on with a blood knot, but I'll leave one of my tag ends of the blood knot approximately 6 inches long. At the end of that 6-inch piece, I'll tie on this soft hackle. Then at the end of my 5X tippet, I'll tie on a sulphur nymph. In this case, I'm now fishing two levels of the water column. The sulphur nymph will be directly on the bottom, whereas this soft hackle is going to be higher up in the water column if you have a fish sitting waiting for these emergers. The second way that I'm going to fish it is directly below a parachute dry fly. So now let's go back to our tippet. We tie on a tippet section. We're going to trim off the tag ends. At the end of the tippet, a 5X tippet, we'll have a sulphur parachute fly. Then on the bend of that sulphur parachute, I'm going to add now about 12 inches of tippet material, again 5X, and on the end of that tippet material, I'll have this soft hackle. So now we have the parachute floating on top, acting like an indicator, and that soft hackle, I want to get that really wet, and I don't want that floating. I want that more in the film or a little bit below the film, because I want those fish to take it as that emerger. I had mentioned variations, and those variations come in play because you really want to think about what you'd like to add onto your sulphur emerger to make it float higher or lower in the water column. If I want it to stay higher in the water column or directly in the surface, I'll add some brown tying thread as the rib. If I want it a little bit lower in that column, then instead of that tying thread as a rib, I'm going to add a little bit of wire because that will add some weight and hence make my fly drop through the water surface. There's a couple different ways to vary this pattern, and I encourage you to try those out. The other piece of this fly that I want you to keep in mind is the fact that it's going to be representing the majority of mayflies out there. You don't have to just tie it for the sulphurs, you can tie it for any other ones that you find in your area. So don't be afraid to vary the size and the color of this fly. So with all that said, I'm first going to show you a picture of the finished fly, list all the tying materials, and then go through the tying procedures of this Sulphur Soft Hackle Emerger. Alright, let's get started tying this pattern. I have a Stonfo Cayman vise. The hook in that vise is an Allen Fly Fishing D102BL. That's their dry fly hook. I'm tying this in a size 16, though I will tie it as large as a size 12. For my thread, I have some light Cahill. This is 8/0 by Unithread. I'm going to leave a longer tag. When I tie this thread in, I'm actually going to start closer to the center and wrap back. I'm going to leave my tag on. In fact, I'm just going to basically forget about it for the time being. And I'm next going to grab some brown antron. This is what's going to be representing our trailing shuck. Brown's a really nice color, but you'll notice whenever you buy it, it's almost twisted and it's just a little bit too neat. Instead, I like to grab a comb, just comb that out a little bit to create some space in between all of those fibers. Once I have it combed out, I'm just going to cut off an approximately a 1-inch section. And with that section, in my opinion, I believe there's just too many fibers there. So I'm just going to remove a small amount of those fibers. And then with my remaining ones, I'm going to tie them in so they're extending over one body length past the bend of the hook. I'm going to lock them in with a few wraps, and then I'm going to wrap the whole way back to approximately the point where the barb would be, though this is a barbless hook. At this point, I'm just going to trim my fibers. And then this is a spot that I'm going to encourage you to basically investigate on your own if you're interested. Right now we have this yellow thread, this light Cahill thread, over those brown antron fibers. Whenever this pattern gets wet, it will not be entirely translucent, though I really prefer to cover my bases. And I'm going to wrap over these brown fibers to create more of a yellow base there, so if there is any translucency, that brown will not be showing, because the sulfur mayfly dun definitely does not have a brown hue to it. So I'm just going to wrap forward. And back. At this point, I'm going to begin dubbing my body. I'm going to be using this dubbing from the Delaware River Club. It's the pale yellow color. This is intended to represent all the different sizes of the sulfur, at least around that area. I'm going to pull out a healthy pinch. I'm going to try to, or at least attempt to, taper my dubbing by dubbing it really tight at first, and then create a larger thorax as I dub towards the eye of the hook. So you'll notice that I do have more dubbing near the back, closer to me, than the hook. Now as I get near my eye, you're going to notice I'm going to just dub back and then dub forward just a little bit more. Again, I really like that healthy thorax, plus it's going to help my soft hackle to splay out. Next, I'm going to return to that tag end of my thread. This is going to be used as a rib. I'm just going to wind this up. Just to create a partial rib. And you'll notice you will be able to see that rib against your dubbing. Just going to lock that in place with a couple thread wraps. Trim that out of the way. And as I have my scissors in my hand, I'm actually going to pull my trailing shuck forward. And I want it to extend just past the eye. Once it's extending past the eye just a little bit, I'm going to trim it, make sure I trim it straight, and then release to ensure it's approximately that length that I want. In this case, it is. So I'm going to be adding in my soft hackle. Now for the soft hackle, please don't be afraid to try any soft hackles you have, including Hungarian partridge. However, I'm going to be recommending a chucker. The reason I'm going with the chucker is because it's got a beautiful blue dun color to it. Now to prepare this feather, I'm going to basically be doing the same method that I always use for my soft hackle flies. With the front of the feather facing me, I'm first going to strip off all that excess at the bottom, basically those marabou looking fibers. I'll show you what they look like. Next, again, with the front of the feather facing me, I'm going to strip off the left side of the fibers. So now it looks like this. Finally, I'm going to grab it by its tips and pull the right side down. Now I've created a tie-in point. Let me grab my needle for everybody. I'm going to be tying it in right here at this point. I'll be able to then trim off this excess piece and then wrap the remaining hackle around the hook. I'm going to be tying it in by the tip because with chuckers especially, they have a very thick stem, and that will just build up the head of my fly way too much. Okay, I have my feather tied in. I'm going to trim this remaining piece. Next, I'm going to grab a pair of hackle pliers. In this case, I'm going to be using Sulphur hackle pliers. Just an excellent set of pliers. I grab onto the stem of the feather and make about 2 turns. I really don't like to make many more than that. So here's 1. Here's my second turn. With that hanging at the bottom, I'm just going to bring my thread through. I'm going to take my thread and basically be twisting it through my fibers. I don't want it to mat down any of those feathers. After I've made approximately 2, I'm going to bring my third one around and pull that stem back. And I'll actually release it from my hacker pliers so I can just stroke everything back. Once I've done so, I can then place a half hitch and whip finish the head of my fly. I'm going to trim my thread, and at the same time, with my scissors in my hand, I'm just going to pull that chucker feather, that chucker stem actually, forward, see if there's any other fibers close with it that I can also trim, and get those out of the way. Now what I have is my finished Sulphur Soft Hackle Emerger. This is an extremely simple fly to tie. You can see it only consists of a few materials: our antron, our thread, our dubbing, and one soft hackle feather. I'll give you a full rotation of this fly. You can see why I prefer that chucker, and it's because it just looks so incredible. Really replicates the wings and the legs of our sulphur. We have a really nice brown antron trailing shuck. And the great thing about that shuck, even though it looks really large right now, once it gets wet, it's going to condense a little bit. And it's also going to really almost trap air in between all those particles. And you'll really be able to see that brown nicely through the water. Whenever I see you, I'm going to really be saying, hopefully, the trout that you're going after. So with that said, this is our finished Sulphur Soft Hackle Emerger. Thanks go out to Allen Fly Fishing for the use of their D102BL dry fly hook. You can check those out and more at allenflyfishing.com. Also, thanks go out to Uniproducts for the use of their 8-aught Uni thread. Thanks to all of you for viewing this YouTube fly tying tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them directly on this YouTube page, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. Thanks everyone for viewing this YouTube fly tying tutorial of the Sulphur Soft Hackle Emerger.